One of my favorite psukim in the whole Torah is in this week's parasha at the end of Rabbi. And that's the pasuk that we're going to analyze today. There's Rashi on the pasuk. There's the Rebbe's analysis of Rashi. There's the comparison between Rashi's opinion and the opinions of the Ramban and the Rambam. Quite a lot for us to cover in the time allocated. So the pasuk says, Tamim tiyeh im Hashem Elokecha, which means that you should be tamim. I'm not going to translate that word at this point, and that's deliberate. So you should be tamim together with or with Hashem your God. Says Rashi, we're going to split the Rashi into two parts. So this is, just to give you context, Parasha Shoftim. It is chapter 18, Perek Yud Ches, Pasuk Yud Gimel, Pasuk 13. The end of Rabbi. Tamim tiyeh im Hashem Elokecha. So Rashi says, what does it mean, Tamim tiyeh im Hashem Elokecha? Says Rashi, His alechi moi bitmimus. Walk with Hashem in sincerity. Or tetzapeloi, and rely on Him. Veloi sachkor achar ho'asidus. And don't try and investigate or work out what will happen in the future. Elakol ma sheyovoi alecha kabel bitmimus. Whatever comes your way, accept it with absolute sincerity. I'm leaving out the second part of the Rashi for now, because let's first look at the first part of the Rashi. 3 questions on the first part of the Rashi. We know that Rashi only comments on something if it doesn't make obvious sense in the pshat, in the simple translation of the pasuk. Now this word tamim, which appears to be the word that Rashi feels he has to explain, right? Tamim, what does it mean? He gives a whole explanation. This word tamim appears multiple times in the Torah before this. Noach is called Ish Tzadik Tamim. He was a tamim. Avram Avinu, Hashem says to him, Hisalech lefonai, walk before me, veheyei tamim, and you will be tamim. We know that in the laws of karbanos, sacrifices, many times it uses the word tamim. Tamim yiyeh l'ratzoin, etc. How come it is that in all of those places Rashi did not feel compelled to explain what tamim means, and now suddenly over here, to almost at the end of the whole Torah, suddenly he says, oh, we need to know what tamim means. So that's question number 1. Why now does tamim require an explanation? Question number 2. Rashi's explanation has quite a lot of detail to it. Hisalech imoi bitmimus, walk with Hashem with sincerity. Tetzapeloi, rely on Hashem, or look towards Hashem for whatever you need. Loi sachkor achar ho'asidois, don't probe the future. And kol ma sheyovo alecha kabel bitmimus, accept everything that comes your way with sincerity. 4 different things. Where does Rashi see in the pshat that there are 4 layers to the concept of tamim? So first of all, every other time tamim was used, he didn't feel the need to explain it at all. Now that he's explaining the word tamim, 4 different layers of explanation, where does he get that from? Question number 3, why does he use this unusual expression, Veloi sachkor achar asidois? Don't probe or investigate the future. Now, why it's a strange expression is because you have to look at the context. Just go back 1 or 2 psukim before that. Just go 2 psukim before that. What he's talking about just before this is people who do try to find out the future. Chover chover, doire shoyel oiv yedoini, doire shalam mesim, different ways that people try to find out the future. Now there we have expressions about trying to find out the future. We have the expression shoyel, to ask about the future, and we have the expression doiresh, to examine the future. Rashi could have easily used either of those words because it would be in context, and he should have said lo tish'al achar asidois, don't ask about the future, or lo sidroish achar asidois, don't examine the future. So our question is, why does he dafka ignore words that are already in the pasuk in context and use a different word, tachkor, to investigate or to probe? Okay, so those are our 3 questions on the first part of Rashi. Now let's look at the second part of Rashi. So Rashi says, if you do all of these things, va'az, then tiyeh imoy, you will be with Hashem, Ulechelkoi, and you will have Hashem's portion. So here we have two questions as well. That sounds like Rashi's telling us you will be rewarded. If you follow the Tamim Tiyeh Hashem Elokecha, if you follow this instruction to be sincere, or whatever Tamim is going to mean, Rashi says to be sincere in your trust in Hashem, then it sounds like a reward, you will be with Hashem and in His portion. Where does Rashi see anywhere in the Pshat any reference to reward? And if he does find somehow that there's a reference to reward over here, how does he know that the reward is that you'll be with Hashem and in His portion? And what does His portion mean? Which is a strange expression in its own right. So many of the commentators on Rashi say that Rashi actually sees this pasuk as being two parts. Tamim tiyeh is an instruction. Be sincere or whole. Im Hashem Elokecha is a different part of the pasuk that speaks to reward. So therefore Rashi is saying, Tamim tiyeh is these four things. Walk with Hashem with sincerity, rely on Hashem, don't probe the future, and accept whatever comes your way. Part 2 of the pasuk, and if you do all of those things, Im Hashem Elokecha, then you will be together with Hashem. That's how many of the commentators on Rashi interpret this strange breakup that Rashi does to the pasuk. However, the Rebbe is dissatisfied with those commentators with their suggestion that the pasuk is two parts for 4 reasons. Reason number 1, which is quite obvious. Usually, when Rashi sees different segments to a pasuk, then he addresses them in separate Rashis, each one with its own independent headline. So if Rashi really did believe that this pasuk has 2 parts, an instruction first, and then reward, he would have said, Tamim tiyeh, and that means, and then he would have had a fresh headline, Im Hashem Elokecha, and he would have explained that this is now the reward. Then you will be with Hashem. The fact that Rashi puts it all into one headline implies that Rashi believes that the entire pasuk is one continuum, not 2 separate pieces. Number 2, another proof that Rashi does not see this as 2 separate things, is because the very first comment that Rashi made was, Hisaleich imoi bitmimus. Walk with him, him obviously referring to Hashem, walk with him in sincerity. Now that word imoi is a paraphrase from the pasuk, because the pasuk says Tamim tiyeh im Hashem Elokecha. So the fact that Rashi says the word imoi tells you that he sees the word im as part of the instruction, not part of the reward, not separate from Tamim tiyeh. So it doesn't seem right, like these commentaries have suggested, that it means 2 separate parts of the pasuk. In fact, point number 3 on that point, Im Hashem actually fits the context of the instruction very well. Let's just go back a step. Let's look at the context. So I'd like to go all the way back to Pasuk Tes, because that gives us the full context. What does Hashem say through Moshe to the Jewish people? Ki ata ba el haaretz, when you come to the land, Asher Hashem Elokecha noisein loch, that Hashem will give you, Loi silmad la'asois kasoi avois hagoyim ohem. Do not learn the disgusting behavior, the abominable behavior of the occupants of the land. What does that mean? You should never find amongst you somebody who passes their children through fire. Koisem kasomim, people who engage in witchcraft. Ma'oinein, people who try and work out all different signs and omens. Or menachesh, people who fortune tell. Or mechashev, and people who engage in black magic. V'chover chover, v'sholoi v'yidoini, which are different ways of trying to call up spirits to know the future. V'doreh shel hamesim, going to the cemetery. Ki soyavas Hashem koloi se'ele, because these are things that are abominable to Hashem. Or viglal atoy evois ha'ele, and it's because of that abominable behavior. Therefore, Hashem Elokecha moirish oisam miponecha. That's why Hashem has allowed you to inherit their land, because they behaved in such a degrading way. They lost their rights to Israel, and you got it. So therefore, Tamim tiyeh im Hashem Elokecha. Don't be with the necromancers. Don't be with the witches. Don't be with the sorcerers. Don't be with the fortune tellers. be with Hashem. So if you look at it, the most obvious way to understand this pasuk is that the word im Hashem is part of the instruction. And to make a suggestion, like the commentators have made, that im Hashem, in Rashi's view, according to Pshat, is reward, doesn't seem to be likely. And then, of course, we still need to understand, what does it mean when it says ulechelkoi? It says that if you do all these things, you'll be with Hashem. That's what Rashi tells us. Fine. What does it mean when he says ulechelkoi? And in his portion. What does it mean, his portion? Okay, so what seemed to be a fairly straightforward Rashi has produced quite a lot of questions. 5 initial questions and 4 objections to the interpretation that the commentaries want to give. So let's run through it quickly. Why now does Rashi feel the need to explain the meaning of the word tamim? How does he come up with 4 different layers to that explanation? Why does he choose the word tachkor rather than words that are used in context, which is tish'al or tidrosh, about looking into the future? How does Rashi know that there is any implication in the pshat of the pasuk that there is reward over here? How does he know that the reward is to be with Hashem? And don't try and tell me that the pasuk is split into 2. First, an instruction, and then reward, because Rashi would have told us that by putting them into 2 separate headlines. Plus, his usage of the word imoy alludes to the word im Hashem Elokecha being part of the instruction. Plus, that fits nicely with the flow of the verses. Don't be with those people, rather be with Hashem. And we have one little question, so to speak, at the end, which is, what does it mean that you'll be with Hashem and in his portion? So let's understand, what does the word tamim usually mean? Usually the word tamim means to be whole. The most common place that we find the word tamim is with regards to an animal that is going to be brought as an offering, as a korban. In order for an animal to be kosher, to be brought as a korban, it has to be tamim. That means it cannot have any blemish. It cannot be missing certain parts. It can't have a lack of health. It can't have even a nick on its lip or eyelid, because it has to be whole. So usually the word tamim means to be whole. When the Torah describes Noach as ish tamim, that means that he was absolutely committed to Hashem. Whatever Hashem had required of people at that time in history, Noach did it all. He was whole in his observance. Likewise, when Hashem says to Avram, "Hisalech lefonai veheyei tamim," you should walk before me and be whole, what Hashem's telling Avram is you need to be wholly committed, 100% committed. So usually the word tamim means all in, which means that if we had just seen this pasuk in isolation, without any context, we would have thought tamim tiyeh im Hashem Elokecha means that you should keep the whole Torah. That's what we would have thought, because tamim always means whole. Keep it all, do everything, all 613 laws. The problem is the context, because the context of this paragraph, starting from Pasuk Tes till where we are now, Pasuk Yud Gimel, is that it has listed 10 things that a Jewish person may not do. Don't learn from the non-Jews. Don't pass your children in fire. Don't do kasamim, which is a kind of sorcery. Don't do ma'oinen. Don't do mechashev. Don't do chover. Don't do oiv. Don't do yudoini. Don't go after don't darshan. Don't go to those who call up the dead. So if you have a look at it over here, it's a finite list of things that you're supposed to do. And the word tamim should imply, usually, do everything, not only these 10 things, not only the avoidance of these 10 behaviors in order to be connected to Hashem. That's what bothers Rashi. The usual interpretation of the word tamim, which would imply do everything, does not appear to be the correct word to use in this particular context. So we've got to find another context for the word tamim. Where else have we ever had the word tamim or a derivation thereof? Okay? Where have we ever had such a thing? So let's go all the way back to Parashas Toldos. In Parashas Toldos, we're told about the birth of the twins, Esav and Yaakov. And that's another time where we had the word not tamim, but tam, which is the root of the word tamim. What does it say there? Vayigdalu hane'orim, vayehi Esav ish yodeh atzayid ish sodeh. The two boys grew up, and Esav became a hunter, man of the field. V'Yaakov ish tom yoshev oihalem. Whereas Yaakov became a person who was tom and always sat in the tents. What's tom, says Rashi? Because obviously we want to know what Rashi thinks of this word. Where it doesn't mean whole, what else could it mean? So you have a look at Rashi there, and he says, Tom means Einoi Baki B'chol Eile. He didn't know all these shenanigans that Esav was involved in. Elo Keliboy Kain Piv. Whatever he felt inside is what he expressed outside. In other words, he had absolute integrity, unlike Esav, who would often say things to his father and pretend that he was so frum. In the meantime, was a huge hypocrite, as Rashi has already told us in the previous Rashi. So Tom means you're not into this kind of nonsense. Mishe'enoi chorif leramois koroi Tom. Rashi says somebody who is not devious. That's called Tom. So if Tomim cannot mean whole, because the implication of this section of the Torah is it's not telling us be whole, observe the whole of Judaism. Rather, it's talking about a specific kind of practice that you should avoid. Then Rashi defaults to the other meaning of the word Tom, or Tomim, which means don't try be too smart. Don't try be too clever in working out what's going to happen and how things going to play out. Hisalech imoy bitmimus. Just go simply with Hashem. So that's how Rashi looks at it. It's interesting to note that the Ramban, who also often comments on the Pshat, sees it differently. And we're going to examine the distinction between Rashi's approach and the Ramban's approach. And at the end, we'll throw in the Rambam's approach as well. The Ramban looks at it like this, and he says, look, there are all these different practices, magic, fortune tellers, people who call up the dead, all that kind of stuff. He says, let's be honest. All of that, look at the Pasuk Yud Beis. Ki soyavas Hashem kol oisei eile. Anybody who does that kind of thing, it's disgusting to Hashem. So the Ramban says, therefore, what it's telling us is don't get involved in that nonsense, which is actually useless, because the Ramban says, in his words, Hashem maintains control of the zodiac and all of these different factors and forces that influence the future. So even if they can accurately tell you what's going to happen, Hashem can still change it. So therefore the Ramban says that the instruction over here is specifically, don't follow their views on how to interpret the future. Rather, be connected to Hashem and have sincerity in believing that Hashem will determine the future. Rashi, as we're going to see, looks at it slightly differently. Rashi, and there'll be a practical difference at the end. Rashi doesn't say these guys are talking nonsense because Hashem can change everything, therefore don't listen to them, rather listen to Hashem. Rashi sees it as don't get involved in the pursuit of working out the future at all. It's not a technical issue that they might make a prediction and will be proven wrong, as we've seen multiple times in history, the predictions around Avram's birth, around Moshe, about the Nile, and so on. So Rashi says, I'm not saying in the Pshat over here, the Pshat doesn't indicate that they're talking nonsense and therefore you should disregard them. The Pshat is telling us that you should have an attitude. Your attitude should be, don't delve into the future. Hishalech imoy bitmimos. And because that is the way Rashi interprets the Pshat, that's why it is a layered approach. Number one, the Torah is instructing us, Hishalech imoy bitmimos. The overarching message of this pasuk is you, as the individual Jewish person, you should take an approach which is I walk with Hashem with absolute faith, with absolute trust. Because I have absolute trust, therefore layer number two, utetzape loi. You should only rely on Hashem. You shouldn't be knocking on other doors to try to find out, maybe these guys have a way, maybe that person can call up my deceased grandmother, maybe this one can tell me my horoscope. No. Tetzapeh loy. Only rely on Hashem. So you're going to say, yeah, but what about the future? How do I plan? How do I know? So therefore Rashi says, loy sachkor achar o asidois. Don't look into the future. It's not a Jewish thing. That's the instruction over here, that a Jewish person should not be concerned about what the future holds. We're in good hands. We're im Hashem Elokecha. We're together with Hashem. He is the captain of the ship. He's not going to let us down. Be relaxed over it. You'll say, but I can't be relaxed. I'm anxious. What if bad things are going to happen to me? So Rashi says, if you're going to be anxious, here's the next layer that you have to know. And a kol mashebo alecha, anything that happens to you, you have to accept it betmimus. You have to accept that whatever Hashem does is obviously for the best. Because Rashi's approach to this is to say that there's an instruction happening here in the Torah. And the instruction is that what you should do is you should be sincere in your faith in Hashem. Therefore, that instruction has to be fleshed out with a few details that you might be concerned about. Well, what about the future? Well, what about if bad things happen? And so Rashi tackles each of those concepts. Now, when you go down that route, and when you read the pshat, the simple explanation, which is that Hashem is telling us, be tamim, be like Yaakov, who wasn't trying to be too smart. He wasn't conniving. He wasn't devious. Rather, just go with simple faith. So when you read it that way, you'll say, okay, I get it. I get it. So then what Rashi's telling me is, don't worry, if you take this approach, then everything will be good. So maybe what he's telling us is the reason you should not be afraid is because this approach is a guarantee almost that everything's good, right? In other words, if you're close to Hashem, automatically you have all the blessings and everything that you want in your life. But that's not exactly what Rashi is saying, because Rashi specifically uses the word oz. Oz means then things will turn out a particular way. If Rashi wanted to say, don't stress because everything will always be good, because you're always in good hands, kind of just like that. In other words, you don't have to even earn that goodness. He wouldn't have used the word oz. Oz is a future word. Sounds very much like Rashi is saying, do this, work on yourself, because it's not easy to have that kind of trust in Hashem. It's not easy just to let go, let God. And then oz, after that, there will be a reward. What will the reward be? Not just only generic goodness in your life. Imoy, first element of the reward is you'll be with Hashem. Ulechel koi, and his portion. What is his portion? So there are various places in the Torah which spell out for us that when we use this expression to be in Hashem's portion, we're actually being quite specific. And we're talking about having the rights to the land of Israel. So what he's telling us over here is not generic. Yes, of course, Imo, you'll be close to Hashem, you won't feel stressed, you won't feel anxious. But the reward, the actual reward that you'll get is lechelkoi, that you'll be given the land of Israel. Now, what does it mean you'll be given the land of Israel? And where does he see that in this particular context? Where does he see it? You just saw it in the Pasuk before, Pasuk Yud Beis. Because Pasuk Yud Beis said, because the occupants of Canaan followed this kind of deviant behavior, calling up the dead, going to sorcerers, fortune telling, the Torah says very clearly, because of that behavior, they lost their rights to Israel. So therefore, it's obvious to Rashi that the corollary is, if you are tamim, if you do what Hashem wants, then you will get the land of Israel. So that's why to Rashi, it's pretty obvious that Imoy is a natural consequence. If you have this faith in Hashem, obviously you'll be with Hashem. But in addition to that, you'll also get a reward, which is lechelkoi, you'll get a portion in his land. That is reflected in the fact that those other nations lost the portion in his land because they followed these deviant practices. Now there's a problem though. There's a problem because basically what we've interpreted over here is not like the Ramban. The Ramban says, don't listen to those guys because whatever they say is unreliable because Hashem could change it. Rather listen to Hashem. Rashi, we have seen, does not take that approach. Rashi says, it's not that you shouldn't listen to those guys because Hashem could change the outcome. The reason you don't listen to those guys is because there's a principle, Tamim tiyeh im Hashem Elokecha. There's a core principle to be sincere in your connection to Hashem and not to try and work out what's going to happen in the future. So then how does Rashi explain the next few psukim? Let's read on. Now, Chamishi, Pasuk Yud Daled. Look what it says. Ki, because Hagoyim ha'ele, these nations, Asher ato yoresh oisam, that you are going to inherit the land from, El ma'oinenim vel koismim yishmo, they listen to all these necromancers and these sorcerers. Ve'ata lo yichei nosan lecha Hashem Elokecha. You, that's not what Hashem gave you. That's not your legacy. What is your legacy? No v'mikir b'cho me'achecha kamoini yokim lecha Hashem Elokecha Elov tishma'un. Hashem promises that He's going to give us a genuine prophet. Elov tishma'un, listen to him. Hang on a second. According to the Ramban, that makes perfect sense. Because according to the Ramban, Tamim tiyeh Hashem Elokecha means don't listen to them because they could be proven wrong in the end. Hashem could change the course of the future. The flow, therefore, is, but instead listen to a prophet, because whatever a prophet tells you, you can rely on it. It's Hashem's word. It's going to be true. That works perfectly for the Ramban. Rashi said, don't worry about the future. Well, if you're not supposed to worry about the future, why do you need a prophet? What's the point of a prophet? If you're not supposed to worry about the future, just simply rely on Hashem. Follow Hashem with absolute sincerity. How does Rashi explain the very next set of psukim that seem to absolutely contradict what he's just said? Says the Rebbe two things. Number one, yes, the word ki might mean because. However, Rashi has already previously explained to us that ki has multiple interpretations. One of the interpretations of the word ki is ka'asher, when X and Y happens. In fact, we've actually just seen that in Pasuk Tes, right here. Just 4 psukim earlier. How did this paragraph begin? Ki ata ba el ha'aretz. Ka'asher, when you come to the land, these are the rules that are going to apply. It's not because you come to the land. Nobody would suggest that it means because. When you come to the land, X and Y will happen. So Rashi is of the view that according to Pshat, the next piece, which is a separate piece, it's another aliyah, it's a separate piece. The word ki hagoyim does not mean because these nations follow whatever they follow and we don't. Rather it means ki ka'asher, new topic, brand new topic. Those nations follow necromancers, and we are gifted to have true prophets. Now, to understand how Rashi explained, that doesn't yet explain it for us. Still seems kind of uncomfortable, because Rashi was of the view that lo sachkor achar asidos, don't probe the future. And here the Torah tells us, I'll give you a prophet to tell you the future. That's why Rashi specifically chose the word tachkoir. See, in the pasuk it spoke about shoyel oiv and doiresh el amesim. Shoyel means you ask a question. I'd like to know what's going to happen. Doiresh means you do a little bit of research. What do the trends show, etc. Tachkoir means that you become obsessed It's a full investigation. Loi sachkor achar asidos. That's what Rashi is telling us. Tamim tiyeh Hashem Elokecha means that you are allowed to have a prophet, and you're allowed to have an Urim v'Tumim, and you're allowed to have a tzaddik, and you're allowed to have people who give you glimpses into what the future will hold. But that should not be your obsession. That should not be your chakira, what you spend time and energy and effort and insight to try and work out. No, Tamim tiyeh. Trust Hashem. If Hashem sends you a prophet, then you'll listen to the prophet. If he doesn't send you a prophet, don't try to find other ways. This is such a potent message. Very often you hear people say, is it okay? I feel I need to know that so-and-so who passed away is all right. Can I go? I know that Judaism says I shouldn't go to one of these people who's a medium or whatever, but I need to do it. People say, I need to know I'm about to embark on a particular, whatever it is, a journey, a business deal, getting married. I need to know. I need to know what's going to happen. That's what this is telling us according to Rashi. Loi sachkor. If Hashem sends you a message, if Hashem sends you a prophet, great. If there is a prophet, shoyel, go ask the prophet. And if he tells you, good, and if he doesn't tell you, also good. But loi sachkor, don't become obsessed with the investigation of the future, using every kind of means that you could possibly find to try and have the comfort of knowing what's going to happen in the future. Don't do that. Tamim tiyeh im Hashem Elokecha. Which brings us actually, even though Rashi is typically about pshat, the simple explanation, interestingly enough, this brings us to a three-way halachic debate around this particular mitzvah. Tamim tiyeh im Hashem Elokecha. Does it belong on the list of 613 mitzvahs? Now, one of the things for those people who are learning the Rambam on a daily basis, you'll know one of the things that the Rambam says is that if something is a mitzvah koileles, if it's a generic mitzvah that speaks to a theme of many mitzvahs, then it will not be listed individually on the list of 613. The Rambam's view on this whole issue, this whole question of looking into the future and sorcery and all that kind of stuff, the Rambam's view is that it is foolish. They don't know what they're talking about. The whole thing is nonsense. Don't get involved. Why? Because we should be intelligent people. That's how the Rambam frames it. We are intelligent people. We have the Torah. We have a connection to Hashem. We should be smarter than buying that nonsense. Therefore, according to the Rambam, Tamim tiyeh Hashem Elokecha is not a specific mitzvah. It is an overarching attitude of the whole of Torah. The whole of Torah is about being smart enough to trust Hashem and do what Hashem says. So this mitzvah does not belong on the list of an individual mitzvah of the 613. According to the Ramban says these guys can predict the future. It is possible they could predict the future. But we have a mitzvah to believe that Hashem can change their prediction. So therefore, this belongs on the list of the 613 mitzvahs. Yes, there is the generic faith in Hashem that we're all supposed to have, and faith is a mitzvah koileles, a generic mitzvah that does not have to be listed as one of the 613. It is a foundation of all mitzvahs. But this specific faith of Tamim tiyeh Hashem Elokecha is an individual mitzvah. It's an individual mitzvah to have faith that Hashem can change even what they predict. Rashi's view is, this is a mitzvah in and of itself. It's not part of the generic mitzvah of being smart and trusting Hashem. It's a unique mitzvah that says, don't worry about the future. In Rashi's view, it definitely belongs on the list of 613 mitzvahs. Not that he says this in his commentary, because his commentary is pshat, but if we were to apply his commentary to halacha, then Rashi's approach to halacha would be that this must be one of the 613 mitzvahs, because it is a unique instruction about how we relate to the future. It's not just part of the general how you have faith in Hashem, which is what the Ramban says. It's a detail within how you have faith in Hashem, but the particular detail deserves to be a mitzvah. It is not a generic attitude of be smart and don't buy into foolish nonsense like the Rambam says. According to Rashi, this is an individual specific mitzvah. Do not probe what the future holds. Rather, just go follow Hashem with tmimus, with sincerity. And so effectively what he's telling us is that if you avoid all of this kind of nonsense, you will be imoy, you'll be with Hashem. So yes, somebody might be able to tell you something that's going to happen in the future, and it might make you feel good, and it might even come true. But you're not with Hashem. Tomim tiyeh im Hashem elokecha. If you don't follow this kind of nonsense, and instead you just trust Hashem, then something more important than knowing information about tomorrow will happen. You'll be with Hashem. In addition to that, if you have this level of sincerity, you will deserve to be in not only with Hashem in a spiritual generic sense, but with Hashem in His land, in Eretz Yisrael. So perhaps the Rebbe obviously doesn't say this in the Sikha, but perhaps as we are today in a world where nobody can tell you what's going to happen tomorrow. So they get up and they say, we're going to ease the restrictions and people can interact some more, but you still have to wear masks and socially distance. Nobody can tell you how long is it going to last and when is the world going to go back to Kav Yochel, so to speak, normal or whatever. So what do? Everybody's becoming an expert. Read this article, listen to that professional, listen to this and this. Comes this pasuk and says, Tamin tiyeh. Just be sincere in your faith that Hashem has got this. Hashem is running the world. He knows what He's doing. He has a plan that nobody yet has thought of, much like the fact that nobody could have thought of the coronavirus before it happened. He's got a plan. The plan will be good. Our job is Tamim tiyeh, to be sincere in our trust in Hashem, and that way we'll be im Hashem elokecha. We'll be together with Hashem. And if we're together with Hashem, we'll be ulechelkoi. We'll be in His land. Not like everybody keeps on wishing, please God, the pandemic should end so we can go back to normal and we can do things we normally used to do. No, ulechelkoi. We want to be in Hashem's land. We want to be in Yerushalayim. We want to be with Mashiach. And now is an opportunity for us to create that path and to create that Giloi and that Geula. How? Tamim tiyeh. By having absolute sincerity in our faith in Hashem. And please God, a little bit of that tamimus and a little bit of that trust should be enough to take us over the finish line and to be imoy ulechelkoi with Hashem in His land with Mashiach, and it should happen right now.